Today I'm speaking with James Valliant. James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a while. We haven't spoken
Too long.
in terms of an interview for way too long. It's been, I think, about a year. But I'm so glad we get a chance to catch up again. And for everyone that doesn't know James, number one, you need to. James is awesome, and he's done a lot of great things. And hopefully, you'll just get sucked in here by some of the things we talk about, and start to look for what else he's done. And I'm going to have some links at the bottom of our video so you can easily, go find him. But in terms of a bio, James is a native of Los Angeles. He obtained a degree in philosophy from New York University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of San Diego. And for over 17 years, he was a deputy assistant attorney for the county of San Diego. And then for many years, he was an expert commentator on religious, legal, and political issues for various local television news programs in the San Diego area. He was the host and co-creator of the award-winning television interview program called Ideas in Action. He also works with the Ayn Rand Center in the UK, providing philosophical seminars. He's also the author of Creating Christ. You can see the boards behind him. Author of Creating Christ, as well as The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. Am I pronouncing that name correctly?
Pine.
Ayn. Oh,
Pine mine.
I need to just work on that. Ayn Rand's
It's
Critics.
funny. It's an unusual name.
It is the Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. We just appreciate you are just a wealth of information, but also what I'm coming to you today for is actually not information as much. What I love about James is that James brings more than just a lot of book knowledge. James has a passion for people and a passion for life, passion for the zest of life, living life the right way, a beautiful way, bringing beauty to the table. And you also keep your discussions, as far as I've seen, even with when you're arguing a point, you keep it friendly. I imagine if you were in person with people, you could go out for a beer when you're done your debates. But that's what we're here to do today. Is
Usually.
Hopefully.
I'd love to say that I've had, open-minded and tolerant and all that, and then loving of everyone. But
hopefully more often than not.
Usually, a debate will end up.
So, on that note, that's what we're doing today. Usually, I'm doing interviews, and I did an interview once before. I'll have the link to that as well. But today, what happened was I basically just said, number one, I need to talk to James. He's the guy that I want to be talking to on a regular basis. Number two, I just have a lot of topics that come through my mind, things that I might work on myself someday. And I thought I'd like to just bounce these off of James. And so we've got a list of, I don't know, a dozen things here. We're just going to take a few of them and we'll see if we can get through all of them or not. If not, we'll get to it. We'll do a follow-up shortly and get to the rest. But basically, these are just some ideas that I wanted to ask you about. I may jump in on some of them. I've been a little bit sick, so my voice is a little bit off, so I probably won't be doing too much of the speaking. But I'm just going to introduce some topics and let you take the floor if you want to take 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever for each one, and just see what you think about them. Because the point of this is a lot of us who have deconverted have a lot of things to think through now because life is we realized we were upside down and now we're right side up, but we have to kind of reroute ourselves. So we'll jump in here to the first one. The first topic I wanted to ask you about was Christian confirmation bias. When people are talking to Christians, and even when we were Christians kind of thinking through it ourselves, we realize that there are certain ways in which you just can't get through a certain wall. You can't get through a certain circular reasoning. And I wanted to ask you, could you just define for us, or what does it mean to you when I say Christian confirmation bias, and how do you deal with that with people, theists, I mean Christians or any kind of theists, that want to debate or want to talk about some of these hard issues about the origins of Christianity or anything, or the Christian worldview, Christian morality? How do you deal with the confirmation bias that you see in those conversations?
That's a really good question. It's not anytime you've got a conclusion and you're working to prove the conclusion rather than starting out by saying, where does the evidence take me? What is suggested by the evidence, and only going down the path that's actually suggested, rather than from the outset knowing what your conclusion is. And with religious people, it's not just the concept of God. By itself, the concept of God is a conclusion that they just start with. And it's not that there's and I don't want to tell all religious people, there was Thomas Aquinas back in the 1200s who said, look, we can't even get theology off the ground unless we can logically prove the existence of God. And he used observation and Aristotelian logic, and he thought he did, the classic 5 arguments for the existence of God, the teleological and so forth, only God can make a tree. Those kind of arguments come from Thomas Aquinas. And so in one sense, he wasn't a mystic in that sense. He believed he could prove it with science and reason. As far as his medieval mind went, that was rational demonstration. And he didn't think like Augustine did, several centuries earlier. Augustine said, you've got to believe to know. Talk about Christian confirmation bias. He enshrined it as a way of life, as a philosophy. If you read The City of God or Confessions by St. Augustine, he will tell Christians, yeah, confirmation bias. Way to go. Believe first, and then you'll know. You see? So in effect, philosophy and science are mere handmaidens to theology. Aquinas reversed that in the 1200s and said, no, 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 no. You've got to prove God logically with observation and logic, and then we can have the whole theology project. And that, in my mind, improved Western civilization, brought us out of the Dark Ages. That's what began the scholastic movement, the humanist movement, led us to the Renaissance and to the age of science and beyond. Observational science suddenly took hold in the Western mind. But with Christians today, how I deal with it is on a case-by-case basis, because most of them don't do the Thomas Aquinas route. Most of them are out to prove, and as I say, not just God. When we're talking about the religious, we're talking about a philosophy, an entire worldview, something they live by, a code of morality that teaches them right from wrong, how to live, the principles they habituate in their character. It tells them how to think, what qualifies as knowledge, what isn't knowledge. And therefore, what we're looking at is obviously a philosophy. I don't think philosophy is an option for people. I think that it is necessary. So if you're out trying to undo a person's whole systematic approach to life and their way of life, it ain't going to be one discussion. It ain't going to be one moment. It's going to be several epiphanies they're going to need to have. I know I needed to when I became an atheist and started deconverting from Christianity. I realized that it's more than just this belief that Jesus came to save me from my sins, or even a belief in God or an afterlife. There's my whole way of looking at life and how I interact with people, the meaning of my life, the purpose of my life, how I approach morality. All of that was informed in fact, how I think about things was informed on a very deep level. So I think what you have to do is you have to get them to first see the issue of belief. Confirmation bias. If I were to say, Tim, there's an invisible elf sitting on my shoulder, and you know how I believe, how you can know that there's an invisible elf? He is the cause of all rain. Every time it rains, you know my invisible elf exists. You see, if I have an argument like that, it's obvious. Wait a minute here. Well, why should I believe in the? I know the rain, but you're now just telling me that the rain is proof for the. But I know the rain exists, or right? That's one kind of classic confirmation bias, and that's really the form it takes. And what you need to do is you need to point out that's all they're doing. So all you're saying to me, Mr. Christian, is that your God is the cause of rain. Well, no, there's rain over here. You need to still connect up the dots to me. They need a lesson in thinking and knowing. They need to know that if an idea pops into your head, elf, unicorn, it doesn't take it away from a Christian idea altogether for them, so that they can see that whatever they're going to say, I know about, they better have the how they know. If an idea pops into your head, that doesn't oblige reality to contain elves. I've got to connect the idea in my head by a process of demonstration and logical proof to the facts of reality, ultimately reducing it to observation, and to do so logically. And without a logical reduction to observation, you can't believe, there's no justification to believe that thing. It's just simply baseless.
And what you're talking about too reminds me that you can't quickly see what worldview you're coming to the table with unless you're willing to admit the way that you were raised, those influences and how they shaped you. And for a lot of us, it's not, I mean, it is a scary thing to question all that, but it isn't even like we'd say, I'm open to questioning it, but it's too scary to do it. It's just, it's not even really, we just know that we're right. Like we just know that we know that we know. And it reminds me, I used to be a custom cabinet maker, and I didn't do what I'm about to describe, but I've seen it in videos where, like, if you wanted to, some people will curve wood, but say you have a board that you want it curved, what you do is you'd cut it into small slices. You'd stick it in this, some kind of thing you've built that will steam it for a long time. And it will get this wood really, really moist and warm. And eventually you take it out, and before it cools down, you quickly put it into the shape with the clamps
You
and the
can bend it
glue.
some.
They bend
Yeah.
it, and then a couple hours later, when you take your clamps off, it's this wood that otherwise would always remain like that is now like that. It's now like a curve or whatever. And if you imagine that that's what happened as you were a child, you were being steamed and shaped by these clamps, and you feel like you're as straight, you're just whatever form you're in is the best form, and it's the only form that you could possibly take that's the right way to see the world. And to realize, no, I was shaped dramatically. And it brings me to the next point of the idea of truth as an acquired taste. And I was going to, before I bounce this off, I wanted to just mention my story. Some of you have heard this before, but that was probably one of the biggest starting points for my deconversion. I remember when I was, as you do as a Christian, you're raising your kids to love the Lord. We're singing Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. Kids are just spinning around, giggling, having fun. It's very fun and beautiful. But you're raising your kids to be little soldiers for Jesus is what you do. You sing the songs of Zion. And I remember thinking, I know what happens next in that story. They go in and they slaughter everybody, and they save the young virgins for themselves. They steal the land, and they're doing awful things. And
This is
thinking,
conquest. They
yeah, this is
sacked the city of
conquest, is
Jericho.
genocide. And I'm thinking, do I want to teach my kids this? And of course, as a Christian, you can't really truly question it. It's like, well, of course, God has the right to slaughter who he wants. He's the king. He can do what he wants. But it just sat with me as like a splinter in my mind. And eventually I remember saying to loved ones around me, I don't know where this is going, but I just want to put this out there. I'm more committed to the truth than to my current worldview. And hopefully they're the same. But if the truth takes me somewhere else, I'm going to go where the truth takes me. And I remember, that being a horrifying thought to the Christians, but that was the starting point. You admit to yourself the truth is more important, but it's the phrase we're going to use for tonight is truth as an acquired taste. And so what does that mean to you?
My experience with children is that they are eager to learn, excited to know. I see a little boy copying his dad, copying grown-ups, and wanting to be a grown-up so bad, and wanting to be able to do what grown-ups do, and wanting to be just like dad, and I'm going to do that. They want to know. And if you've ever seen the intent, as a parent, I'm sure you have seen it, the intensity and seriousness, the look of a toddler as they're trying to learn something, as they're learning language, learning to walk, learning to read, learning to, every step in their development, they're taken very seriously, and they're diligent about learning it. And there's a reward feedback to learning. You master a topic when you get to school gives you the self-esteem of, hey, I know this, and knowing gives me a sense of control. Knowledge is power. The more I know, the more in control and confident I'm going to feel. So there's a positive psychological feedback loop to learning and knowing and truth. So that tells me that when we have habituated, when you and I at some point in our childhood had to say, no, truth comes first, what got us off the path? What knocked us off this benevolent cycle of positive learning just from my own mind, my own observation, my own thinking, learning it for myself? I was told authority. I was told to turn my mind over to authority. They know more, just like all this other stuff we're teaching you, math. Well, there's these experts over here. They know better than you do. So turn your mind over to them. And whether it's math or religion, the kid needs to learn that it's his judgment that has to be satisfied. No, I get it. 1 + 1 = 2. That makes sense. You can show that to me. You can show that to me with set theory and Venn diagrams and all kinds of other ways. Now, what we teach kids, though, is morality, particularly by authority. Why don't I tell a lie? Why don't I steal? Why do I have to share my toys? Okay, those kind of things.
Because
Okay,
I said so.
because I said so. What do? We either physically punish them or we frighten them. And religion provides like I say, philosophy is an inescapable need for human beings. They need a sort of frame of reference, a worldview, an approach to ethics. They need to know an idea of right and wrong and how to judge, things, people themselves. I mean, to judge people, we need to judge people. There are a lot of rotten people in this world. I don't want to have a business associate who's a cheat, and a liar, and a thief. I don't want to associate with a violent person. I could kill myself. It could be dangerous to my health. So, but I need to judge, and even more importantly, I need to judge positive people. This guy's a good employee. He's a good boss. This is a woman who will really be my life mate instead of some narcissistic, self-absorbed, whatever, who's a toxic, poisonous drain on me. So I need to be able to evaluate people, and I need to do that morally. And religion has had the monopoly on morality, and it teaches us through authority. Why is something good? God says so. And it's just because God says so, because God could tell Abraham to go kill a child, his own child, and we're expected, Abraham's, I guess, the test of faith is to be expected to be able to go commit child murder. So literally anything God tells me to do, I have to be prepared to do. Is that what you're telling me? So once I substitute my judgment about something, whether it's mathematics or ethics, to authority, I've now gotten into the mental mode of deferring my head to authority, trusting authority. So we had to come to a point where we said, wait a minute here. No, authority is not going to cut it anymore. I'm going to think through this for myself, and the only thing that matters is my judgment and the truth. My judgment of the truth is not going to be take a back seat to any authority. That's in effect what you and I did. And so we had, unfortunately, habituated into our heads is a hate of the truth, an avoidance of the truth, a distrust of our own minds. That's where it comes from, a distrust of our own minds.
Which and it's even what it's like. It says literally, like the verses, do not trust not in your own understanding.
Bingo.
It's like you're not. It says the heart is desperately wicked, I think, or deceitfully wicked. Like you cannot trust your own mindset. And I think when you add to that the whole authority thing that you're talking about, this kind of cushion around it that they give you, where they say he is the king, but he is good, or C.S. Lewis would have said he's not safe, but he's good. He is this lion. He's Aslan. He's not a tame lion, but he is good. And you get that, like, yes, he's the authority, but he'll take good care of you. And so it kind of it keeps the question, like, should I bow my knee to this authority? Well, maybe if he was, if they were to tell you the true stories of the Old Testament, you'd think he's brutal, but you get the good loving parts about he loves you, loves you, loves you. So he's a good king. And so anything that in you would make you want to question and say, oh, should I really obey this authority? Oh, but he's so good. Of course you got to obey him, because he'll take good care of you.
He was our standard of good.
Yeah.
He was the pinnacle of all good. I mean, it literally, if you ask a Christian, you question this, it's like, oh, the alternative is Satan, right?
Yeah.
Because you see, it's an either or, and in a way, I know obviously both God and Satan are mythological things in my head, so I reject that the alternative. But in effect, that's what I mean when I say it's a worldview. It's a system of ethics, and it's a system of epistemology. Yeah, Paul says, this is going to be foolish to the world, but that's what you need to be, is foolish to the world. Okay, it's going to be folly to the wise. Well, that's what we need to be, is folly to the wise. Well, then they're telling you right there, reason is not the thing to go by, observation and logic. And see, we know that observation, I know that, look, see there's a table and a lamp. My perception, I know, works. Logic, if I work and do it properly, logic can infer correctly things from the world, reason. And so what they do is they say, well, that's no better than faith. That's just you're just putting your faith in reason. Well, no, wait a minute. Faith is going by something other than reason in the epistemological sense. Faith is the opposite. You got reason over here, faith over here. And whenever they notice how they're trying to say, oh, well, you just have faith in reason. No, we couldn't have had a concept like error, hallucination, dream, faith, vision, unless we had the truth. Every instance where I've discovered I was wrong, I had the truth. Every instance where I found, oh, I was just dreaming. Well, I knew I was just dreaming. Every instance where I was hallucinating, oh, well, I just dropped some acid or whatever the other is. I knew I was seeing weird things. So there was you see, there, I know how the senses get me in contact with reality, like an idea can't just pop into my head, right? I know
Mhm.
how logic keeps me connected to reality. But there's all these magical means, these know-how magical means, faith, Ouija boards, horoscopes, crystal balls, you name it, whatever the alternative to reason is, that's it. And we have to recognize that there's only one way of really not of giving you that know how you know. There's no magical knowledge. We need the how, and the only how is reason. Unless you can show me, like I can show you with how logic, I can show you with observation, show me how that connects me with reality. Crystal balls, tea leaves, that astrological horoscope, that doesn't. But you see, they even know they need some pseudo means. There can't be causal, so they'll give you this other means. But that's really just a way of shutting off your thinking and turning your mind over to someone else's authority.
Yeah. And
Every,
I love too how with when you compare them and you say, well, faith kind of says, I know the answer and I don't really need new information because I've already got it. It's kind of like that phrase, what is it?
to those who know,
God's
no explanation is necessary. To
yeah,
those
well,
who don't, none is possible. So in either case, I won't explain.
yeah. Well, I was gonna there's another one that's a little bit less, a little bit more common. It's what is it? God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I might be
That
missing one,
settles
but
it,
something
right?
like that.
That's it.
But then
There
the other
must
side
be
is
you the authority.
yeah,
Many fundamental, that's the key. That's really what distinguishes a fundamentalist. It's in the Bible, it's true. How do you know? Well, it's in the Bible, it's true.
yeah. But
Well,
I
is there
love
some
how the
test for
on the
no?
other side, the reason is saying I might claim to kind of know something, but I'm completely open and even encouraging correction. Like I want, if you know more information that would steer me off where I'm at, I want that. That doesn't threaten me. I want to be corrected. It's like the scientific method. Bring me,
Like the opposite.
we
Reason
hold things
requires all
tentatively.
the facts, right? To know, we have to have all the data that we can have available, and we want more data. And I'm grateful for those who correct me because that's part of reason. I know I can be in error.
Yeah.
See, that's the other thing here with this confirmation bias thing. From the time we're infants and we know that there's some unpleasant reality and I close my eyes and it doesn't go away just because I close my eyes as a toddler, I realize that my consciousness has to submit to reality, that existence has primacy over my consciousness. I can be in error. I could be hallucinating or dreaming. I can be in error. Closing my eyes doesn't make the unpleasant reality. My consciousness must submit to reality. And every time I commit an error as a child, I'm retaught the painful lesson that I can be wrong. And so I learned that reason is a self-correcting process, one
Mm.
that's always making contextual, and this is an important thing for religious versus non-religious thinking. When we go by reason, we realize that our conclusions are no better than the factual context that I had available to make it. So even if I've been perfectly logical, I haven't made any fallacies, I've integrated all the evidence, I could still be in a position where this is just true given the context of, given this context of data that I had, it's true, but only in that context. And should new data come in, there's the classic blood type. We discovered A, B, ABO, that stuff. But then there was this whole other Rh factor that they hadn't discovered before. It didn't invalidate A, B, and O, but they realized that Rh negative and Rh positive were also an important factor. Some new factor was brought in that is equally important in medicine, right? So rational thought is never finished.
Mm.
Rational thought will never be either omniscient or infallible. It'll operate by a certain means, and it'll be specific to the limited context that it started with. And well, that's not what they want. They want automatic. This is how religious knowledge works, you see. We want it automatic, we want it certain, and we want it now without a process. I want it to, or some magical process like faith or vision or some revelation. Someone to tell you, oh, my proof. Well, Jim, they'll tell me, I can't prove it to you because you'll require some verifiable observation. But I had this experience. an inexplicable personal experience to me that no one, and they'll try and off half the time, maybe half the time, they'll try and tell me, you see how inexplicable that was? No, but of course I can't reproduce it like an experiment, like a scientific experiment. Well, wait a minute here. Talk about confirmation bias. So it's a subjective thing that only you knew, no one else can verify. It's a private observation. And you see, what they're doing is they're putting their emotions first. They're not putting the methodology first. And that's the thing. People have to realize that there's no magical knowledge. Only reason works. Reason is, look, if you were to have a God, and many theologians have said this, if you were to have a God that could be proven and defined, that would be the end of religion. Because, you see, he wouldn't be some omnipotent, omniscient, stands outside of the entire universe to give it creation from nothing, ex nihilo creation, right? He would just be a part of the universe. He'd have an identity, he'd have features, he'd, maybe be like a galaxy or some cosmic ray or something, but he would be specific, finite, identifiable, working by causality, and we could prove him by, no, that wouldn't be God. That'd be totally unsatisfactory, right?
And then you wouldn't need faith because you could prove it. I guess that's what faith must be. Well,
and yet it grounds their whole worldview. So
yeah. Could you speak to the idea of how hard it is for people to consider even the remote possibility of bucking this system that everyone around them, the community, has established? Like, just the fear factor of saying, if I say that you all are wrong, especially when you're sheltered, where it's not just like 80% of you are saying this, but I know some people that disagree, but where you're like in those groups, and I mean, I was in one of them, pretty much everyone surrounding me was, there were probably differences of, theology here or there, but by and large, the basics is the Bible from God. Is salvation necessary for us to, be right with God and have peace with him? Is Jesus the, Son of God, the Savior? Is his death and resurrection the way that we have propitiation? All that stuff, the basics of how to get eternal life, you all pretty much agree on that, and you surround yourself with that. How hard is it for people to say, if maybe all of you are wrong?
It's so hard to be really independent in your mind, and that's where independence starts, is in the individual mind, and it has to. But if you think about it, everyone in history who came up with a new idea had to exercise, in every new idea started in one mind, a brave mind who's willing to say something different than what everyone else had previously said. Right? And so that has to fight the cultural inertia. Now imagine a culture before writing where knowledge is passed down in a purely oral way, so that the accumulated knowledge of the past has to be memorized by the next generation. You take the group of youngins out to teach them how to hunt, or how to farm, or how to milk the cow, how to build the house, certain things that it took us generations to learn to do, passed down still in a purely oral tradition. There's going to be an intense cultural conservatism, an inertia against the new. Like if I told the story about the samurai swords in Japan, the making of medieval steel technology was really perfected in Japan with the samurai sword, and they made these really awesome weapons. But it was a military secret, so they never wanted to write down all the scientific, technological steps, how to make their tempered steel swords. And so it was passed down in a purely oral tradition by these masters. Now, half the production process is a ritual, a religious ritual. They pray to the east, they pray to the west, then cool the sword, but beat the sword some more. So part of it is technology, science, and part of it's religion. Right? But in a written context, do you know which parts to remember and which are safe to forget? No. And so we remember it, we have these mnemonic devices, which the ritual really is only just a mnemonic device to remember all these different steps. But we can't cut out any of those religious BS steps, because who knows, that could be an important step, like putting it in cold water. And so there's a conservatism here, and consider when we're children, most of what we learn from our parents, teachers, people, the generations of knowledge I couldn't have accumulated all the knowledge that took generations of humans to acquire. And so am I, as a child, going to question all of this amazing knowledge and it's important knowledge? I mean, basic medical knowledge, how to build a home, how to get food, how to, protect ourselves. all this kind of basic knowledge, how I'm going to stand out of the crowd and be the one guy saying something different? No, obviously there's a huge pressure to conform to your group, to conform to your society, to conform to your peer group as we get older. Fitting in as teenagers is psychologically important to us. So yes, it takes an emotionally courageous and a degree of internal confidence about your own judgment to stand up and say, this is my truth, and no, I know this is the way. I know this will work. Or I know that's true. Or I know this is an improvement. And so humans were once cannibals and human sacrificers. Slavery only ended in the middle of the 1800s in the civilized world. And so progress is possible. No question about it. But the point is that to make a change, for thousands of years, people thought slavery was natural and inevitable. To make that change, someone's got to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. This is just wrong, and this is why it's wrong. People should not be treated that way. People should, et cetera, et cetera. You wouldn't want to be treated that way, and so everyone has to be treated the same that way. To get that idea of rights, everyone's got the same rights, and if you want your rights respected, you got to respect the equal rights of everyone else. To get that is a moral lesson in the head too. But you see, with Christianity, look at all this. Like I say, you're unplugging an entire worldview. Why be honest? I was trained from childhood that the reason why I'm honest is to appease God and to get into heaven or something like that. Or I'm taking it on the authority of someone, right? And to challenge that, right, is, obviously now consider this, I have a view of honesty, but it's based on my needs here on earth, my needs in reality. I have lots of such needs. One of them is, for example, I get a great benefit from your trust. Your trusting me is a huge benefit to me. But catching me in one lie could destroy a lifetime of trust altogether. All it would take is one little lie. So what I have to habituate in myself is consistency. I have to habituate into my character honesty. Now, on the other hand, is telling every lie wrong? If I'm hiding Jews during World War II from the Nazis and the SS comes knocking at my door, am I going to say, they say, you're hiding Nazis? Am I going to say second door on the left? Or am I going to look at them in the face and lie? So, Jews? I don't know any Jews. What the hell are you talking about? Obviously, I'm going to lie, and that's the moral thing to do. Religion teaches us a different approach to ethics. Wrong is wrong in itself, intrinsically, no matter what. It has nothing to do with the causes, has nothing to do with why we tell the truth in the first place. So it's not contingent on some context, right? And so religious people will say, oh, well, see, your ethics you atheist ethics is just contextual, based on the situation, situational. No, I have principles that I've habituated. I never will attempt to gain a value by lying, like get the money out of your pocket by giving you some scam, lie. So I'm never going to attempt to gain, or even get in some woman's bed by oh yeah, I was a World War II vet and this got this scar and no, I'm never going to attempt to gain a value by dishonesty, because only reality can have a value to me, right? And I'm not going to corrupt the integrity of my own consciousness in the effort to try and get something. That's self-defeating. Will protect a value that's being wrongfully or forcefully being taken from me by lying. And lying is then the moral thing to do. Yeah. So instead of having some rule, never tell a lie, some religious absolute like a commandment. Now, it's not one of the 10 commandments, honesty, by the way, except in the context of perjury, right? But thou shalt not kill. Again, murder, we're told, is what it means, because, of course, we have to exclude self-defense and reasonable justifications and ... But what commandment morality gets us thinking is thinking in terms of principles intrinsically. It's sort of written into reality. It's not our relationship to the world, our needs in human life here on earth. It's built in. It's carved in some metaphysical stone on high because God has said so. So good is good in itself, regardless of the consequences, like the philosopher Kant would say. So there's this religious view of intrinsicism, and the other side is the sort of the same coin, but it's the other side of the same coin. Well, then it's all just, if it's not intrinsic, then it's got to be purely subjective, seat of your pants, pragmatism, no principles, you've thrown morality out the window. No, that's the classic false alternative. And yet I see so many religious atheists, secular people, still thinking in terms of principles, and especially moral principles, like religious people, as if there's good in itself, or we have to throw the whole thing of ethics out,
Mm.
which of course confirms what religious people say, that you atheists can't have morality without God.
Well, it's a good reminder too that this religion had its tentacles or its roots in us so deeply that even when you deconvert it, it really takes a while to unlearn what you've learned, and we don't even notice it sometimes.
Boy, is that true. How many times have I caught myself decades after deconversion thinking like a Christian, either in my mental method, like I was just pointing out there, my what philosophers would call epistemology, my psychoepistemology. I've got the psychoepistemology of a religious person still operating, even though I reject the supernatural. And I say I'm only going to go by reason now and my own judgment. The truth, like you say, is more important. So you say truth is an acquired taste. It has to be reacquired for those whose minds have been corrupted by religion, is the way I would put it. Because there was a negative cycle, you see, where I'm avoiding the truth or getting into confirmation bias, just as there was a positive cycle of learning. But we've been so corrupted by that negative cycle of avoiding facts, Darwin over here, evolution over there, I think whatever is inconvenient to it, or some story from the Bible I can't explain. Oh, okay, it's over there, and so I've got to sort of put up fences around it to protect it from the facts, because after all, I'm protecting a whole worldview, my view of right and wrong, good and evil. Well, the Russian novelist Dostoevsky asked, he was a Christian and a conservative, and he asked, without God, why be moral? Perfectly valid question in the middle of the 1800s in Russia, 1860s or something. He was asking this question, and we still now 160 years later, we don't have much of an answer to give him. Unfortunately, I think the great weakness of the new atheists these days is their failure to answer Dostoevsky. Without God, why should I respect your rights? Why is killing wrong in some cases, like lying? See, that is pointing to the causal reasons why murder is wrong. And once you understand the reasons in reality that make murder wrong, then you understand when it is wrong to kill and when it might be exceptional and it'd be okay to kill because the guy was coming at you with a knife. I'm going to kill you, kill you, kill you. Okay? So is it okay to kill Hitler in the middle of World War II? Well, sure it is. He's killing millions of people. So when is killing okay? If you have a religious view, a pacifist, this is a classic religious view, they're pacifistic. Oh, there was a great show once. There's this cardinal. He was going off hiding from, in this historical drama. And he was hiding from the Pope. And he was going off from Rome. And he was going off with two nuns. And there were these guys who were going to attack them on the road. And so the cardinal, he's a clergyman. He can't kill. He's got to turn the other cheek and everything. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And even Thomas Aquinas said, self-defense is unavailable to Catholic clergymen. They've got to just take it. Even if some madman is attacking them, they can't fight back. They get to turn the other cheek, submit to the evildoer, all that stuff Jesus said to do, which Augustine thought applied to everybody. Thomas Aquinas said, no, only the clergy, only the apostles have to really obey that stuff. So in the scene here, the cardinal kills the attackers who are clearly going to rape the nuns and kill them all, kill all of them. And so what he says to the nuns is, sometimes goodness needs a little badness. What a Christian way of looking at it. No, killing those thugs was good. Good. It is a Christian cardinal who says, no, I have to do this evil thing, this intrinsically evil thing, killing these attackers, even though they were the thugs who were going to kill all of you. Wait, no, there's something screwed up in the way you're thinking here. And the alternative to it isn't just pragmatist seat of the pants. The alternative is developing rational principles based on the needs of human life here on Earth. And until and unless we start doing that and start thinking in terms of principles that come from reality, why we do it, which creates the context in which lying would be okay and which lying wouldn't be okay, in which killing would be okay, which killing wouldn't be okay. Only that can really serve as the basis of scientific morality. Yes, it's contextual, but it's also principled. But it avoids the false alternative between rank subjectivism on one hand and intrinsicist dogmatism on the other. Notice that dogmatic moral judgment. Jesus says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." But of course, Christians have been the most dogmatic moral judgers in the history of dogmatic moral judgment. So, you say, this person did some infraction against he blasphemed the Holy Spirit. Well, that's unforgivable. Some denominations, because Jesus said only blasphemies against the Holy Spirit are unforgivable. Well, some denominations say that, hey, you're going to hell. You crossed that line. You uttered those words. So wait a minute. God is so reasonable in his morality that if you cross some magic line that has no particular reason for being crossed, he's going to send you to eternal lake of flame. Right.
I think in your answer that I heard a little bit of Ayn Rand peeking through there.
Yes. Yes.
That's good.
Ayn Rand had a remarkable discovery early in her career. She believed that just positing the idea of the supernatural, or God, necessarily drives a wedge between what you think is moral and what you think is practical, between the ideal, which is obviously in the supernatural realm, and the real. This real corrupt material, it's lesser. It could be downright depraved and rank and evil. We could be just some gutter sewer. This is a vale of tears, the use of the phrase that some Christians use about this life. This life is merely a test. So you'll notice that it's not just a theory-practice dichotomy between the perfect. Notice this religious view of perfection. You see, we'll never have perfect. Well, what use? What goddamn use, forgive my language, is a concept like perfection if it can't be achieved in reality? How could anyone ever think that something would be good in theory, but not, well, why is it good in theory if it doesn't work in practice? What's the good, where does the good theory, supernatural?
You'll have to wait to heaven to find the answer.
Lived up to. Religious ethics aren't meant to be lived up to.
You have to wait till you get to heaven to find the answer.
You'll find the answer. That's what we're told. So you see how it all feeds itself. So the theory-practice dichotomy, the mind-body dichotomy even. You'll notice how mystics in both the Eastern and Western traditions engage in war against their own. They'll deprive their bodies, starve their bodies, torture their bodies, whip their body, the yogis from India or the monks from medieval Europe, literally flagellating their own bodies, taking vows of celibacy and poverty. You're supposed to give up this life for the next. This body of yours is an obstacle with its lusts and its passions and its greeds. It's all that self-love that comes from your body is an obstacle to your soul's perfection and getting into this perfect other dimension, which is really the ideal dimension. So you see what it does is it creates these false dichotomies, religion. A supernatural order will make you inevitably think that things can be good in theory and not bad, or my body is really ultimately my enemy. So poverty, celibacy, start drinking laundry water like some medieval saints. Literally, there were saints who slept on rocks and drank laundry water and starved themselves to show how holy they were. Whipped their backs bloody, literally in the Middle Ages. This war on the body is the sort of the inevitable result of the idea of the supernatural sneaking in.
Yeah.
See?
And you're getting there into, I think, Platonism a little bit, aren't you?
Yes. Plato is...
little dualism.
He is the father of religion, philosophical religion in one sense, because he did give the philosophical view of the supernatural the most sophisticated treatment it had ever gotten, and by serious thought. The Greeks were rigorous thinkers. They had discovered logic. They had discovered the self-conscious science in a way. And so Plato was trying his darndest to, he was aware of mathematics. He was aware of the logic that is, at least the rudiments of logic that his own teacher Socrates had developed in Athens. But he was trying to justify a view that the world that we see and live in is not real. It's just an illusion, shadows on a cave. In order to see the true reality, we have to transcend this order. True reality is where ideas exist in some other dimension in a perfect form. And that's what we call them, the forms. So that out there, we see a bunch of horses and they all look different to you and they're all moving around, right? Well, that's just an illusion. There's really a perfect horse in the world of forms. One perfect horse in the world of forms. See, he was trying to understand what universals were. That is to say, universal propositions, concepts, which take in multiple. What is their relation to reality? Well, if we don't have with that worked out, the relationship to reality worked out, the belief is going to be, well, wait a minute here. These ideas plug me into some other reality, a higher reality, and so the dualism, theory, practice, mind, body, this whole idea of Platonic perfection, this whole idea of Platonic love. What it is it's a separation, you see, of the low corrupt matter from the pristine world of mental forms, which is the true reality, which must exist out there, but of course only exists in people like Plato's heads.
And as that evolved to, towards Neoplatonism, that eventually became kind of embedded right into Christian theology, the sense that this world, to use less of a theology and just more of a song, I think it was, of this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. This is not reality. And the phrase of, as I think it is something like as in heaven above, so earth below. Just the idea that like the temple in Jerusalem, the goal of it was not just to create a place to worship, but to say this is a poor but adequate reflection of the real reality. And it's funny that concept is one of the biggest things that enraptured me, not right before my deconversion, but in the last decade. I was so convinced as a Christian that evolution was bullshit, that the reality had to be that God would not do anything randomly. So everything we see had to have some purpose. It was either perhaps to explain his nature, or to explain the glories of salvation, or to explain our future heavenly home, something like that. And so if the way that a hummingbird would move its wings really quickly, or the way that bees would create honey, I was looking for some, like, there's some kind of, there's a purpose for it.
Yeah.
And it enraptured me in the sense of that there has to be some way in which this all reflects the creator. I mean, because you couldn't imagine as a Christian that God was just throwing the dice and flinging stuff out, hoping it lands okay.
Johannes Kepler, the great astronomer in the late 1500s, there were only 5 visible planets at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't see all, 8 or 9, depending on how you want to count the planets in our solar system. You could only see 5. And the thing about those 5 stars in the sky is that they're different than all the other stars, right? Which move across in an even plane across the sky. But being in orbit around the sun like the Earth is, Mars will have like a funky path. It'll go woo and do these little loops across the sky if you track its path. And so the word planet literally means wanderer. And no one could figure out, because none of the Venus and Mars and Jupiter all did their own funky, unusual things. No one could figure it out. Kepler said, I could prove the existence of God if I could prove that the 5 planets each had the orbit fit into one of the 5 regular Euclidean solids of geometry. Only a mathematician, that would be the signature of planning, the signature of a mathematician designing the solar system, because each of the orbits would match one of the 5 solids, because there's only 5 perfect solids in Euclidean geometry. So he said that would definitely prove it. Of course, he kept trying and kept trying, copied to a Christian confirmation, but he's trying to prove a conclusion. He's not letting the facts take him where the facts go. There came a point where he gave up. He said, forget this model. And when he forgot that model, and he said, what's going on? What explains the observations? And he looked, and he got the observations exact from this Danish astronomer named Tycho Brahe. It took him a while to get it from him, but he got it. And then he figured out the laws of Kepler's famous laws of planetary motion. And without knowing it, he was going to he was going to help Newton develop gravity, because he said, as the planet is moving towards the sun, it speeds up. And then it shoots around the sun, and then as it goes away, it slows down. And they're ellipses, they're not circles around. So each planet's got its own funky ellipse around the sun, but each are doing the same, following the same principles of planetary motion. And without knowing it, he gave sort of a factual basis for Newton's theory of gravity later. Because what he did is he said, forget my attempt to prove God with this. I'm just going to go with the facts and describe it as I see it. And when Kepler threw away his religious, Platonic, Christian preconception, his desire to prove God was a great mathematician and to have the signature evidence of creation, he went with the facts and discovered the laws of planetary motion. He didn't discover the cause. That would have to wait another 100 years for Newton to come up with gravity and say, now I can explain. Baseballs and rocks falling on Earth follow the exact same principles as planets around suns, and these are the mathematical equations that unify that, all that. So it's when we submit to reality and go with the facts and say reason and only reason, and I will take correction. I will say I don't know when I don't know. I will admit when I'm limited to a factual context, and I will change my opinion, or at least enhance my opinion when new facts come along. It's a self-correcting process. If you're not willing to do that, then you're not engaged in what I call the process of learning and knowing. The only real way we have, like there's no magical idea pops into your head, like I was saying. No, it's the only real process that actually connects us with reality and can get us real knowledge. I mean, look at how powerful humans are. We land on the moon on a dime every time. We split invisible atoms to release the power of suns. We alter molecules to create new life species with genetic engineering. We compose symphonies and operas, and the human mind is extraordinary and can acquire knowledge and can do powerful things with that knowledge. On the other hand, it is an achievement to only reason and a rigorous, strict adherence and the belief in the absolutism of that reality. The religious person does not want this reality to be the ultimate reality, so it's kind of fluid and corrupt and not really real. Get your head off that. What did Augustine call science? The lust of the eyes. Science was the lust of the eyes. So don't do that. Contemplate God, said Augustine. That's where happiness comes from. Because obviously this life is not what matters, it's the next life. So if that's your whole approach, it's going to have devastating effects across the board on your philosophy, on your approach to life, your worldview, how you live, how you think, how you judge. And as I say, one of the unfortunate things is that even when people lose religion, they will continue in modes of religious type thinking about ethics or principles or the standard of knowledge, right? They'll continue to use concepts that are inapplicable to reality, like Platonic perfection, right? Religious ethics is not meant to make you successful here on Earth. It's not meant for human beings to thrive on this planet, no. A practical end like that is not the purpose. It's to get into heaven, right? Yeah. So it has nothing to do with whether you can live up to it. In fact, you need redemption because you're inherently corrupt. You can't live up to God's ethics. I mean, and consider Jesus, I mean, lust in your heart, you're already sinning. You don't have to commit adultery or just get angry. You don't have to commit murder or assault somebody. Just that anger is a sin, says Jesus. Well, who doesn't sin? If we have these emotion crimes, that everyone's sinning every day. And so you can't live up to it. You're inherently corrupt, and you need, again, that's an impossible standard of morality. But an impossible standard doesn't stop Christians from believing that it's moral. It doesn't give them pause to think, well, wait a minute, if I can't live up to it, why am I even trying? You see?
One of the things that you're making me think about, and I think about this a lot, you know, in the Bible, the verse where Paul says something like, if Christ has not been raised, then we are of all men most miserable. I think he's kind of in the sense of saying, like, we've wasted our time. If this whole thing isn't real,
this resurrection of Jesus thing, then this whole Christianity salvation thing is all wrong.
Yeah, and it's like there's the question that comes up a lot from Christians to unbelievers. You know, are you willing to risk your eternity, knowing that your eternal destiny for rejecting Christ as your Savior, that it's not just annihilation, although there are some Christians that do that, but most Christians I'm familiar with would go the route of, you're going to be punished
Bible
for it.
Scholarship movement, Jehovah's Witnesses in the wake of that have said there's no real hell, and don't worry about that. Even hell will be destroyed, and even bad people go to hell. But you know, there's that TV commercial they got on these days. Are you going to heaven or not? And that guy wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. So I say to myself, why doesn't he just tell the truth? Are you going to heaven or hell, which is what you as a standard Christian believe?
Yeah. I think Seventh-day Adventists are also more in the annihilation group. But yes, like Christians would want to say, like, are you willing to, you know, how much is your soul worth? Are you willing to wager this? And but at the same point, you have to ask back, yeah, but if you're correct, if you're right, if Yahweh's God and his son is Jesus and salvation is through the cross and death and resurrection through the blood of Jesus, then you're right. There's a lot there that we lose by saying, I reject it. I reject Christ as my savior. I mean, I'm not saying I reject him as my savior. I'm just saying I don't think he's real. I don't think Yahweh's real. We're not rejecting, or we're not like, I hate God. We're saying he's not there. Um,
Yeah,
but
I can't hate something I don't believe in. I don't hate
yeah,
ghosts or elves or dwarves either. I just
yeah,
don't
exactly.
believe
But
them.
like you would not ask the question like to follow up. Okay, so if you're asking me as a Christian to an unbeliever, are you willing to consider you might be completely wrong, and therefore you're in a sense you're wasting your chance at escaping the flames of hell?
Pascal's
You want to
wager, right?
say, yeah, Pascal Switch, you want to say back to them, agreed, but now are you willing to admit the sadness of what if you're completely wrong? What if this is a mythological worldview and you had literally one life? You don't get to spend it in heaven or hell afterwards. You don't get to go anywhere. You just had this one single life, and that's it.
Life.
You turn
And
back
you
into
blew
dirt
it.
and you
And you
blew it.
blew it.
Yeah.
You blew this very finite life.
Yep.
So let's
And
wait a minute here. Blowing a second of this finite life seems to me a bad thing. To blow like monks do with vows of poverty and celibacy has nothing to do with happy life on earth to them. I mean, you can say, well, why don't you go marry a nice woman and have a happy life? Why don't you go off and get a career and have some comfort and send your kids to a nice school or something? No, 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 no. Well, it's not about you're thinking like some earth creature, as if the only thing was this life, right? And if you don't think like that, you will have screw ups in the way you think, in the way you act, in your morality. You cannot, my response to Pascal's wager is just that. The idea that if it's wrong in your wager, Mr. Pascal, you cannot contain the idea of God into one little corner, compartmentalizing it, putting it on a shelf over here, and think it's not going to affect everything else. No, our mind is an integrating process. Thinking is a process of integration. I've got to collect all the facts and integrate them without contradiction into one single logical whole. I cannot have little exceptions flying out because they won't be just exceptions. Everything's connected to everything else. We were just going through how the very idea of God corrupts how we think, how we feel about morality, our emotions, the guilt we have, the way we approach ethics, either dogmatically or intrinsically or subjectively. All of that is affected. A religious view is going to have negative consequences on the rest of your mind. You
mm,
cannot contain them. I can't necessarily predict which negative consequences are going to be the worst for you and the worst for this guy, but I can tell you a lie is a bad thing. Disconnection of your mind to reality. The whole point of our consciousness is to connect us with reality. Insofar as we're disconnecting ourselves from reality. For example, trying to prove the conclusion, the confirmation bias, I want to get the conclusion here, and that's just, it's not reason, it's rationalization.
mm. What you're saying too reminds me of I think one of the subtitles of Hitchens' books. It said something like how religion poisons everything, and it really does. It
Boy, is that an insight. Some of Hitchens' later insights into what the effect of religion was, profoundly powerful.
yeah.
I think there's been certain philosophers, but they only really started in the 1800s. Men like Friedrich Nietzsche, Christopher Hitchens, to some degree. Of course, the greatest I would point out, I think, was Ayn Rand, because she really just boom shattered the whole approach of religious thinking, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm,
She was, one of the things that get this. One of the things she's most controversial for, atheists, conservatives didn't like her because she was an atheist. Leftists didn't like her because she, didn't like socialism or communism. So both sides. But you know what they really all hated her for? She was an advocate of selfishness, egoism.
mm.
Live your own life for your own success and survival and happiness. Your life is an end in itself, needs no higher aim to justify it. And so it's funny because both sides will attack her for being selfish, but then you have to ask, well, why? What's wrong with selfishness? What's wrong with me having happiness? Is
Mm.
there something wrong with me? Every breath I take, every morsel of food I eat is selfish. Look, love is selfish. If I were to tell my wife, the reason why I'm with you is you're a charity case. you're not very attractive. You're boring. You really are an emotional drain on me. There's really nothing that interests me personally. I get no selfish. Oh, Lord knows I got no selfish value out of this relationship. It's all charity. It would be the deepest insult to her, wouldn't it? No, for love to mean something, it has to be exception making, and it has to be a recognition of my selfish pleasure that I get from your company. Tim, I love these conversations. It is a selfish benefit to me, these conversations, right? And so the if I were to tell you, well, you're just a boring, gosh, I hate talking with him. He's so dull. He's not a nice guy. He's stupid. He's just never says anything interesting. No, it's because you're cool, you're better. I'm discriminating, I'm judging. Love is selfish. And if I can say, our relationship here is purely selfish, it's the highest compliment I can pay you.
Yeah.
And the more selfish it is for me to say my friendship with you, the higher the compliment. So Ayn Rand said, we've got a whole, first of all, do you even know what's in your long-term self-interest, she would ask. But notice that secular people on the left have not rejected Christian ethics at all. They just assume as an axiom that selfishness is wrong, even if in her view, she has an ethics of selfishness that tells you, no, you've got to respect everyone's rights. You can't murder people. You can't steal from people. You've got to respect their rights for your own selfish benefit. And she has this argument for how you're acting self-destructively if you do not act in a principled way, if you do not act in a rational way. Reason is her top virtue. Being principled is a necessary thing for her. So she doesn't reject ethics. She'll give you reason. She'll give you her principle for honesty and why you should respect other people's rights, why you should have integrity and justice, and she'll go through a whole series of virtues and defend them on the grounds of it is good for your long-term self-interest. And if anyone tells you otherwise, so why is it that we accept? And this is one of the most amazing things. I find this in England is one of the most atheistic countries on earth. They have a higher percentage of atheists, I think, than just about any other country on earth, England. And yet every single English atheist, practically, with some exceptions, some Ayn Rand fans out there, we do have a bunch of Ayn Rand fans in England now, but apart from them, they have totally accepted Christian ethics. Turn the other cheek. Pacifism is an intrinsic absolute, for example. Well, of course we can't hurt anybody, even if we've been attacked by Islamic terrorists on 9/11. We can't act in self-defense. We have to minimize. So wait a minute here. If we truly reject religion, what we have to do is reject it methodologically, ethically, psychologically.
Those steps, it feels like you could do this for years, even decades, and still only be scratching the surface. And I love how you talked about some of the other people that that we're building on. And going back for a minute to Christopher Hitchens, I think he had a quote, if I remember at least the second part of it, where he said something like, "Religion, you don't get your morality from religion. Morality precedes religion." And as you think through these things and you build on them, you realize, kind of like you and I are going in a lot of circles where we're talking about what are the origins of the Christian religion, what are the origins of the Jesus character. And by the way, a plug here: go buy James's book, Creating Christ.
Thank you.
But it's almost like just like we would in these circles talk about, where did Christianity, can Jesus character come from? Or go back a little bit, where did the Yahweh character come from? You realize that there's a bigger picture here. Where did we come from? Where did our consciousness come from? We talk about evolution a little bit maybe, and the way the mind has evolved. But where did our morality evolve from? And it's almost like you have to really, as you unlearn what you've learned and you realize Yahweh and Jesus aren't real, you get the freedom, if you want to take it, to say, there's a human journey that's been going on that's much, much bigger than me. And if I want to understand today, I have to understand my place in this, and to say, all right, there were people, who were used to, being savages, for lack of a better term, cannibals,
sacrificers.
Yeah. And at some point,
every continent, primitive human beings killed to appease the gods, killed their own children. Not just animals.
Sometimes by hundreds.
When they killed animals, they killed people in human sacrifice and ate their flesh.
Yeah.
Slavery was only ended in the civilized world in the middle of the 1800s.
Yeah. And at some point, all these things, like you said, somebody had a new thought and that it slowly evolved, and it gives you the freedom to realize that, and this is jumping ahead a little bit. I won't jump into the end of it here, but to realize that some of the things that we would say are, or we would have maybe grown up thinking this is wrong, that's wrong. It's not only not wrong, there is no necessarily right and wrong in certain decisions in life, but that we're just so used to the social constructs. And I admit we have to still
Yeah,
work.
we were talking about emotions there, for example. Emotions are automatic responses.
Yeah.
If I see someone and I feel lust, or if your injustice made me feel anger, what I do about it is my choice, but the emotion is automatic. That is outside the realm of moral judgment.
Hmm.
It would be like me blaming you for the race you were born, the color
Yeah.
of your skin, or being born in the late part of the 20th century. It's not your fault. You didn't choose. Only that which you chose can be subject to. Aristotle understood this much, but Christians, I see, they have this intrinsic view of ethics. Even if God had predetermined that you'd do that, you're still sinning because somehow it was still your choice anyway. Well, without getting into that can of worms, you see how it will affect all these other things.
Yeah.
Yes. And we are in ethics, we were just before the show we were talking, economics only began with Adam Smith in the late 1700s and his discovery of the division of labor. Psychology only began in the late 1800s with Sigmund Freud, maybe William James, William Wundt. But these sciences are brand new. Ethics, it seems to me, because religion has had a monopoly for so long, has still dominated the field. In my view, Ayn Rand gave us the basis, I think, for an objective, she called it philosophy of objectivism, an objective, secular, earth. She called hers, before it could call it objectivism, she called it a philosophy for living on earth.
Hmm.
So what she was going to do is say, no, morality for the needs of human beings that tells people not to suffer and die for some other dimension, but to enjoy life and live. That's the point of ethics. Happiness can't be achieved in any random old way. No, you've got to consistently adhere to certain principles to greater ensure your long-term chances for success and happiness. That's the basis for ethics. But all of these sciences are still relatively new. We have to realize that we're still sort of in the infancy of the human development in this regard. It's true we've had tens of thousands of years. We've come a long way, baby, as they say in the cigarette ad, but when we really have. And all this knowledge has been hard won. Hard won. I mean, the whole idea of God is, I can understand people 10,000 years ago believing in gods. Before people knew that only humans had consciousness, to use one of the other concepts you brought up, that it was unique to animals to be conscious, and only humans had this complex consciousness with words and culture and stuff. We have imputed consciousness onto the universe itself.
Hmm.
And so the animals are far smarter than we are. And not just the animals, the sun leaps up into the sky just as we leap up out of bed every morning. And it's got its purpose, and the river is trying to get to the sea. So you see, science begins when we begin to not say the gods or God did that, but there's some non-God scientific causation involved. The river is going there because of gravity, and snow, melts falls in the mountains, melts, goes down because of gravity, etc. A causal explanation replaces now a divine explanation, and that's the birth of science.
Hmm.
So I can understand thousands of years ago why we had to learn that only humans, but what we did with God or gods is project human consciousness onto, graft, in effect, human purposes, as you point out. Everything has a purpose. God, why did God make hummingbirds fly the way, like you said? So everything's got to be part of a purpose, like we have a purpose. Well, I put this here because I have a purpose, but hummingbirds evolved because they adapted through the course of natural selection, right? We're going to have the real cause. It's not going to have some purpose to the universe itself. Once you say there's a universal purpose, what philosophers call universal teleology, then you've jumped outside of scientific reasoning altogether. And so while I could understand primitive people believing in God, now that we have understand consciousness a little better, we understand that we are the only certain biological organisms possess consciousness at all,
Mm.
animals. And we among the animals are the only ones who like land on the moon and study other animals. So we've reached a particularly advanced state of self-consciousness, not just consciousness, but self-consciousness, critical self-awareness that humans have achieved has given us a distinction. This is where some of our secular friends get in problems too. They don't want us to be any different than the apes. We are different than the apes. And recognizing that fact is really important, it seems to me. But
Mm.
we are evolved from a common ancestor from apes. That's why 99.9% of our DNA is this, or whatever this percentage is the same. There are close relations. You cannot deny with the DNA evidence. See, again, are we going to go by the evidence? Look at the similarities like Darwin did and do it just from observation like he did? And then when we discovered DNA, realized, no, we're molecularly evolved from the same molecules, the same single-celled organisms, ultimately. Are we going to let the facts tell us where living species come from on Earth? Or are we going to say, no, 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 since God told me in Genesis where they came from through Moses in the Torah, I'm going to say that it's the divine six-day creation of Genesis.
Yeah.
And it's the stark alternative, you see. It's mysticism and faith over here versus reason over here. And it's an either or. It's an either or. And they exclude one another. Absolutely exclude one another.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. We have to it's true. I mean, and God knows what we don't know now. I mean, like I say, we're just on the dawn of some of these sciences. I hope 500 years from now, they'll be looking back on us and saying, oh, what stupid, ignorant fools they were. Look at the silly mistake you made over there. Hopefully, they'll be correcting me and saying, look at how much I didn't know. I hope. And if someone can correct me and improve see, I go by reason. I go by the scientific method. I'm grateful for the correction. I'm grateful for the new knowledge.
Hmm.
That's the way it has to be. That's the opposite of the religious confirmation bias, you see. They have to fear every new fact. A new Darwin comes along with a new theory of natural selection. Well, that's got to be frightening. Look at the Catholic Church. They opposed vaccines because obviously disease was God's plan. So in the first vaccine, the smallpox vaccine wiped out smallpox. They killed a significant percentage of the world's population and was still killing people. They wipe out smallpox. Catholic Church says no. Anesthesia comes along in the 1800s, and a doctor first wants to use anesthesia on a woman in labor, the intense pain of giving birth. Catholic Church says, no, that's a sin. Obviously, Eve was punished with labor pains. You're interfering with God's plan. Anesthesia is immoral because it interferes with God's plan for inflicting pain on us. Vaccines are immoral because that interferes with God's plan for diseases. They oppose streetlights. In creation, God clearly separated day from night, right there in one of the first bits of Genesis. So streetlights at night, electric lighting, that obviously interferes with God's plan. So in effect, what you cannot contain, now that's an extreme example, I know. They opposed every innovation. They opposed liberal democracy. They opposed rights. They opposed democracy. They said, no. We want theocracies or kings with divine rights like Louis XIV. The Catholic Church has never been a friend of human progress in any real significant way. But that's an extreme example. Of course, they're against birth control and abortion. I mean, birth control is a sin to take artificial birth control because, once more, you're interfering with God's. Every act of sex has to have the potential of, even a miracle potential if the couple is infertile. You cannot take artificial means to stop this God plan. So it's reason and reality versus faith and this other inhuman, I'll say it, faith and death. Self-flagellation, self-abnegation, self-destruction, the attack on the body, the dissing of life on earth. It's one or the other. We either choose the absolute of reality and reason, or it's anything goes, and we say we throw reason in the ash can so we can get away with believing whatever we wanted to believe in the first place. But as I say, since it's justifying their whole philosophy, their whole worldview, it really takes major penetration because you don't have, it's not just the metaphysical question of God's existence, right? You've got to go through step by step, deprogramming them in their modes of thinking, in their approach to ethics, in the way they condemn themselves, the way they dogmatically judge others. All that is an important philosophical and psychological development that needs to happen, and humanity is still waiting for that to happen.
Yeah, good thoughts. I was going to go back to a couple of things you said a while ago. One thing I was thinking of, and I forgot to say it at the time, but the whole idea of being able to think separately from your community. One of the things that I think a lot of deconverting people are realizing is that we don't really prepare ourselves individually and as a community for the shunning, and just how much it hurts to be shunned. Some people, they lose relationships, or at least they're very, very strained. Some people, I read stories every week of people whose parents are, even their parents, their loving parents that raised them, are just obnoxious to them in terms of pushing the Jesus narrative over and over, and almost mocking their own kids if they don't say, yes, I agree, Jesus is
How horrible!
Savior.
How horrible!
And
Your own parents, you know.
yeah, and the shunning, and it makes
It can be even worse. You know, you're losing your friends, people you really had a good time with, you shared values with. They were your friends, and now you're losing your friends. You're having to develop a whole new social community around yourself. And even if you have Christian friends who are more tolerant or don't give you crap every time they talk to you, you're still going to want secular friends. You're still going to want, you know what I mean, people you can talk to about your deconversion process and how you think and the things you're now, like I say, all this other stuff that it involves philosophy and that may have come from religion that obviously your religious friends aren't going to understand. Look, I'm thinking differently about things. I'm looking at morality differently. I'm psychologically changing in certain ways, right? And
yeah,
all that is going to be you're going to want visibility. You're going to need friends to, I've seen brave people do it completely on their own. Really brave, heroic people do it. Talk about the rugged individualists of the soul. These people can go off and use their own mind and say screw you to the whole world, and they don't much care, right? But to me it does matter, and to me I did need help, and I wanted friends who agreed, who I could share this with at least to some degree. So yeah, it's a vital part. See this, how comprehensive a deconversion process is. It's mental, it's moral, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's social, and all of that needs to be taken into account with our friends who are coming off of religion.
yeah. And even in terms of basic education, when you start to realize and really admit to yourself that history was written by the victors, and that there's a lot of history that is not history, it's propaganda. You realize that not just do you need to deal with your own shunning, it's it's in your face, people are being mean to you or ignoring you, but you're also you're angry at yourself for not getting out earlier and realizing how silly this worldview was.
See how that's a religious mode of thinking.
Yeah,
you're blaming yourself for what you didn't know before you knew it.
I just mean in the sense of like
say, give yourself, just like I give primitive people in history slack, for believing in God. Thomas Aquinas, only 800 years ago, believed in God, and I give him slack because he helped secularize and bring reason into the Western mind. And so he's kind of a hero for me, even though he's a Christian saint.
Yeah.
So context. Don't kick yourself. That's a religious dogmatic way. So you cross some magical intrinsic line. Bad is bad. Evil is evil in itself. Good is good in itself. And so since I didn't know and I didn't have perfect knowledge, okay, no. That's a religious mode of thinking.
I hear you.
You see?
But it's
so what they need is the support to be able to say, don't kick yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before you knew it. Give yourself the credit for learning it.
Yeah,
give yourself credit for learning it.
Yeah, I agree. Better late than never. It's the idea though that you feel like you're the sucker in the room. You feel like you should have. I mean, to me, it's like one of the most basic ones, and I still kind of shudder to even say these words. But come on, a God who says, "I want you to cut off the end of little boys' penises." I'm sorry, but that alone, apart from
who was the sick monster that first thought of mutilating a baby's genitals, that sicko,
yeah,
Abraham or something, I don't know where it came from. There was no God who said that.
Egypt, yeah, I know the Egyptians did it.
Yeah, Egypt, yeah. But holy moly!
But I mean that alone. I mean, I hear your point, but that alone, I think, apart from all the other extras that just pile on top of it and kind of bury the Christian worldview. But that alone, one thing I should have been able to look at that and say, nah, that doesn't sound right. And I didn't, or
Something
genocide
wrong
for sure.
about that, right?
Yeah, something really weird.
Why are we mutilating a baby's
Yeah.
genitals?
And why would God, who,
What's that all about?
and why would God say I created you perfect, now mutilate the, like that?
Right. I
This doesn't
created
make
you
any
in my image.
sense.
Indeed, I created you. Actually, humans created God, as I said, in
Yeah.
our image, and
Yeah.
that's really the order it goes.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, go.
and when your ethics is arbitrary like that, and there is no factual basis for it, and it does come in as a command from God, obviously, it's any of those. And again, don't beat yourself up for it, but any of those should have given us clues. You know, I'll put it this way. That didn't bother me. It should have bothered me more. Isn't that wild? When I
Yeah,
was young,
it
it
is.
didn't bother me as much as it does now. Now I look back on it and I think, yeah, why didn't that jump out at me? No,
Mm.
I give myself, though, the credit for seeing, wait a minute here. They're saying believe and go to heaven, or don't believe and be thrown in a lake of fire. Okay. Should belief be based on bribes or threats? No. Belief should be based on evidence and logic and my own best judgment. And the minute someone pulls out a gun and threatens me or offers me a bribe to wait, those aren't the incentives for knowing. Knowing is the truth. Truth is the reward for knowing, right? And if someone needs to threaten me to get me to believe them, so it was not John 3:16 even so much as John 3:17 and 18. And if you don't believe, you're already condemned, right?
Yeah.
So that was the part that got me. I said, wait, even as a young person, that's what started to put a wedge in for me. So I give myself the credit not for all that I missed, because God, I could read stories about how God commanded Saul to commit genocide on the Amalekites, kill all the women, children, slaves, animals, down to the babies and animals. This is like, okay, like it was their fault, God. You're going to wipe out the Amalekites, though. But stuff like that should give any sane, humane person pause. What kind of monstrous stories are in this thing? Abraham being told to kill his own son? Saul being told to wipe out the Amalekites, including the children and the slaves and the animals? I mean, this God guy is sounds to me like he's an indiscriminate kind of monster, a sadist.
Yeah.
And any of those should have given us pause, surely. But Noah's flood should have given us pause. In reality, there was all kinds of maybe huge historical floods that could have maybe been the historical inspiration for it. But you know something? The people who suffered those floods weren't being punished. It wasn't because they were evil. It wasn't because God was wanted to. But after this flood happens in this, this civilization or this town or whatever it was that gets wiped out. They turn it into a moral story. God wanted to visit punishment because they become so corrupt and they were disobeying God. Whatever the story is of God's punishment. So they turn this natural event that had no blame consequences, whatever. People shouldn't be feeling guilt about it, into this whole thing. So what happens when disasters happen? I lived through it. The AIDS thing that was killing so many people who were intravenous drug users and homosexuals in the 1980s before they developed the cocktails for it were being wiped out. And what were the religious preachers saying? This is God's punishment on America for America's decadence and specifically the corruption of homosexuals.
Yeah. Jory
America
Falwell.
was less decadent. God wouldn't have punished us with AIDS. Wait a minute here. So is that the way your God rolls?
Yeah. I remember that with Jory Falwell and I think probably the Jim Dobson folks in the family kind of groups. Yeah, they've done that repeatedly. Yeah, even natural disasters, big hurricanes or whatever.
Natural disasters. God's punishing.
Yeah.
Wait a minute here. So if I don't get it, God is favoring me. If I do get it, God is punishing me. And so now I've got to feel guilt for what?
Yeah,
So
it's
see, it's this
crazy.
built in, it's again a religious mode of looking at nature where everything's got teleology, but it's also avoidance of reason. No, don't think for yourself. So you don't really assign blame in a rational way at all, even. And it affects the whole way you look at ethics and the way you judge things. It's a whole mindset, you see.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the issue too of like don't blame yourself, one of the things that I've said a lot before and I think about a lot is that it's a testimony to the effectiveness of childhood brainwashing, where it's a version of psychological manipulation. And you get, again, going back to the wood being curved motif. You get people young enough at the right age in the right sheltering perspective, and you get them to a point where it's not just that they believe, but that they kind of check their brains at the door, and kind of the questions that they should ask, they don't come up with. And so one of the things that I love, just with my own kids, I love teaching them the questions such as, does this sound right? Like, just to say that to yourself, does this sound right? And like you said, the threatening, like if somebody threatens you to believe, do you have to believe? And or just the appeal to authority. If I say you have to believe like me, do you have to? And I love how my kids know the answer is no. We don't have to
Right.
believe like you, Daddy. We don't have to be an atheist. We don't have to believe like anybody else.
That's wonderful.
We can just
You're not corrupting their own firsthand grip on how they know.
Yeah.
And that's what, if you can avoid that religious corruption so that they develop the confidence in their own minds, they will question authority, they will test it, they will submit it to their own acid test. They won't have any problem saying, no, wait a minute, just because this guy said so doesn't mean I have to buy what he's saying.
Yeah.
That is the way we should arm our children with education, and benevolent parents with self-confidence.
Yeah. And even to question our own atheism, to say, you don't have to be an atheist. You
I can
take the
remember
truth wherever it goes.
My parents were benevolent like you too. They said, well, this is my best. Sometimes they would say, there's a benevolent way of saying it. I'm not omniscient to your own kids. Maybe I don't know all this. Maybe this will have to wait for your generation to figure out. I remember my parents telling me things like that. And I thought, wow, that admission of they don't know everything, that admission of maybe you'll figure it out or your generation will figure it out, just filled me with, wow, yeah, okay. It's up to me to figure it out. They were the ones, obviously, who instilled this attitude that caused me to be able to question the threat, the carrots and the sticks of the Christian belief system. And so I'm grateful to my parents. If you don't, what you can do is you can it's like a kind of child abuse. If I was a prosecutor, and if violence and sexual abuse can ruin, devastate, affect, horribly mangle the way a child will have it'll affect all their other intimate relations. If their parents treat them that way, for example, or if someone adult they trust when they're young physically abuses them, mental abuse and psychological abuse, threats of hell, for example, telling them not to think for themselves. That kind of stuff is psychological, emotional abuse that, as I say, you're going to affect the way they think, the way they judge, the way they look at themselves, their own self-esteem. They're going to hate themselves. I remember one of the worst things about Christianity is I remember reading passages of the New Testament that implied that I shouldn't love myself, that selfishness is wrong. And I remember coming to self-contempt. Self-contempt. Why am I thinking I'm so smart? I was a smart kid, okay. And I look back, I was a pretty smart kid, but why was I saying to myself, oh, that's pride. I shouldn't think of myself like that. Obviously, Jesus is talking to me here when he says I shouldn't feel pride. And so I began to hide my virtues. I began to be ashamed of my goodness. And that is so perverse. What you're doing is you're setting in reverse the correct self-esteem. See, self-esteem has to kind of be earned with achievements as we grow up. We learn to walk, we learn to talk, we learn to ride a bike. Self-esteem grows and we say, no, I'm competent and worthy of facing the tasks in life. Christianity is pouring cold water on that over and over and over. No, you're not worthy. You're corrupt. You can't control it. You're sinning every day, whether you choose it or not. Morality is intrinsic. This world is a vale of tears. You better just sacrifice your happiness here and maybe go join a monastery or something if you really want to get into heaven. You certainly have to turn your life over to Jesus. Let go, let God. Let Jesus take the wheel, or whatever all these modern sayings are. What they're psychologically repeating the message. Stop thinking for yourself. Stop thinking that it's about yourself. Never develop any even rudimentary self-esteem, even earned self-esteem. That's what Christianity is systematically doing to young people. So it's no wonder that it's hard to get over religion. It's a worldview you're asking them to question. It's a whole approach. It's the way I live. You're asking me to unplug not just a belief in God, but a belief in what morality is, how I judge people, how I judge myself. That's why it will take, I think, some more time before humanity. I do believe it's possible. People say, "Well, is there a religion gene or something?" I don't. If there is, I don't have it. And so I do believe that human beings can make, as we've discussed, the huge progress humans make. Human beings can make significant progress and learn. And I think that humans can and will one day be religion free. And it will be a much more benevolent world where we respect each other and respect our lives as the precious, irreplaceable things they are, and respect one another's quest for their own happiness. I mean, for that to be the benevolent basis for human coexistence, we have to reject religion. We have to fix reason firmly in her seat, as Thomas Jefferson said, and call her to her tribunal every fact, including the existence of God, including the entire subject of morality. And we have to be willing to question even the morality of Jesus. You know, everyone thinks, oh, well, you know, there may not, Christianity may not be metaphysically, there may not be any God. Jesus may not have been the Son of God, made miracles, or risen from the dead. But, boy, that morality, ooh, as if turn the other cheek and love your enemy and submit to the evildoer is good morality. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's Plato, and you can hear Jesus talk Plato all over the place. I mean, don't store up your treasures here on earth, where they get corrupted and decay. Store them up where they're imperishable in the kingdom of heaven. That's pure Platonism, pure materialism versus idealism, dualism, built into the Plato was the first teacher of Jesus, but you can really see here that dualistic mode is going to be stuck in religion until we get to this philosophy of living on earth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mode.
Well, I wanted to make sure I brought us back to a point we were talking about a few minutes ago, and then I've got one last question. I'm running out of steam myself, or it's getting late here on the East Coast, but the whole idea of we're apes, but we're not just apes, we're evolved apes. One of the things that I think is really helpful in that discussion is to admit that we are human in the sense of our what you might call our base desires or base drives. And there's a lot of questions I want to
emotional palate.
Yeah, like I want to get into this in a probably a separate conversation in much greater detail. I'll save this whole big topic for a separate. Maybe we'll just do a one-off on it. But just to kind of take a quick segue to it and say, as you're deconstructing and deconverting, kind of like you would say, give yourself the freedom to admit you did the best you could, but you made mistakes and now you know better. But also to give yourself the freedom as you're deconstructing to saying all these things that you told yourself you're bad for. You mentioned pride, but for a lot of people, it is certainly their sexual desires, their drives. The whole you're told you can look once but don't look twice. The second look is sin. The third look is absolutely it's lust. All these things that people beat themselves up over for years. And I mean, I honestly think, even just thinking about it now, thinking as we're speaking, there are people. There are, especially, from a man's perspective, there are men who just hate themselves because they looked twice today at something that they shouldn't have. And
because they have the normal lusts of a Homo sapien male.
Yeah.
So it's
just
their own
to
nature
give yourself the freedom
for.
Yeah. To realize you have that
nature. No, obviously, one of the important aspects of our biology is our ability to reproduce, and therefore human beings are born, thank goodness, as sexual beings and with a sex drive. And instead of looking at it as a natural thing that we embrace, that we're born with a certain emotional palate. We have a capacity to feel anger, lust, and that emotional palate is outside of any moral evaluation realm. Right? It's who I am biologically.
Yeah.
There are certain things. If I get hungry, I'm going to be hungry. If I haven't had sexual release in a while, I'm going to start getting horny, as we say.
Yeah.
I'm a biological being that evolved in this world with certain emotions. Yeah. And instead
of celebrate that
for my nature, why don't we, yes, of course, we can't just let my sexual this is what the religious person will say. Well, obviously, you have these innate bad things, lust. We got to contain that. We got to tap down this bad thing. No, 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 no. That's the wrong way to look at it. There are ways that are of doing it wrong. In other words, and by the way, I would say the guilt that religion connects to sex is connected to a lot of sexual neurosis.
Yeah.
We'd have less sexual neurosis, it seems to me, if we didn't have the guilt that was planted in it from the beginning about religion. So, but no, there are sexual neuroses. I don't like child molest. I don't like rapists. I don't like, sexual harassers. There is a morality to sex. Just because we have this natural lust doesn't excuse anything I do based on my lust. My actions can be judged. My emotions cannot be. So, but the point is, if you're going to tell me that the lust itself is bad, then there's no good outlet.
Yeah.
Not even having a healthy, good, intimate relationship with my wife is good. That they somehow say, well, no, the Catholics have come around to the point that they'll say, oh, well, sex is beautiful in the context. Well, no, there was no sex is beautiful stuff in the Bible. Even that is now a modern compromise. Where they say, oh, sex is beautiful in the context of marriage. Well, I don't think marriage is the magical. See, notice the intrinsicism there. There's this magical line. Classic religious thinking, right? Magical line, marriage makes sex okay. Huh? Huh? That's pure intrinsicism, as I've called it, right? That kind of religious thinking. And what even as secular people, we've got to get that out of our heads. And so the idea that sex is a bad thing, as such, is built into, Jesus had to be born of a virgin for some reason. Adam and Eve, they were naked or have sex and reproduce until they were punished and cast out. So,
and wasn't there a gospel even? Wasn't there a gospel where the Jesus character and the disciples were actually advocating, if you want to be saved, you have to be celibate? I think there was one of the gospels said that.
By the time Christianity really took hold, there was a full-on. Paul, in his authentic letters, says, if you can be celibate, do it. To be like me, be celibate. If there's anything good about sex, well, why? See, because you don't want your mind on earthly things, you want your mind on God. So if you can do it, if you can tamp down that sex thing altogether, be a celibate. If you can't, get married. It's better to marry than burn. But that's the best you'll say. It's better to marry than burn. So the point is, there's sort of a sex containment policy, right? And the ideal is to be really the celibate monk. Jesus even talks about being a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake, and that's a good thing. So Christianity is opposed to sex. It's part of this anti-body, anti-this world metaphysics that's built into any religion. It's the direction of any religion. It must become, at the end of the day, a war on your own body. You are at war with reality when you're at war with the truth and the facts. You're at war with your own mind, right? When you blame yourself for your emotions that are just automatic. And of course, you're at war ultimately with your body itself, which can really only explain why both Eastern and Western religious traditions have asceticism and monks and this literal attack. They literally end up attacking, because let's face it, death is the great liberation. Death is the goal.
Yeah.
It's death worship. And that's what we need to understand. We have a basic choice. Is it going to be death worship, or is it going to be life worship? That's how I would summarize it.
Yeah. And the case in point, the hero of the story is a man who has a human sacrifice. Like, this is a human sacrifice cult. It's a death cult. And it's amazing. When you're in it, you can't see it. When you are in it, you're like, is it blood magic? No, it's not blood magic. Is it a death cult? No. But once you're out, you're like, oh my goodness, what was I in? This was a cult.
Vampires drink blood to get immortal life. Jesus said, drink my blood and you'll get immortal life. So you see there's a blood cult thing here. You see where the idea of vampires is intimately connected with Christian theology, drinking blood and immortal life?
Yep.
No, how dare you consider it like that? Or, you like McDonald could point, Bacchus, he was the god of wine. Now, it made sense to drink his blood, which is the fruit of the grape. And since we're drinking wine in the communion mass context, but wait a minute, how does it make any sense to be drinking Jesus's blood? In fact, that's very anti-Torah. You can't be drinking blood at all. The idea of consumption of blood is unkosher in the extreme. So while it makes sense as it comes from Dionysus, the wine god, that would
Yeah.
make perfect sense. It makes absolutely no sense in a Jewish context. But on the other hand, it makes it kind of plain where those kind of ideas come from.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I did want to wrap up with got a lot we're going to leave off the table, but for the sake of time, maybe just take 5 more minutes and deal with this phrase. When you're a Christian, or if you're just hearing a Christian preacher, one of the phrases that comes up a lot is the reason that you feel this tug on your mind to consider, my words as the preacher, the reason you feel like maybe the Bible is for you, the reason you feel like maybe you do need to be saved and rescued from your sin, is because at the end of the day, God, number one, made you, but he made you in such a way where you're like a puzzle that has pieces in the middle that are only going to be filled by him. And so you have what they would call a God-shaped void in your heart. And so you end up trying to fill it, of course, with intimacy, relationships, whether they're legitimate or not, with pleasures of the world, alcohol, money, pride, whatever. You fill your heart up with all these things, and if you're really, really clever at it, you might kind of numb the surface. But eventually, if you're in the honesty of your own heart, in the darkness, when all the layers are peeled away, you're going to admit to yourself, they would say, you have completely failed at facing the truth of the matter, which is, and you can't deal with this any other way, your life is empty without God, and you try to fill it with anything else and it will never satisfy. It's like saying, I want water, I'm desperate for water, and all you do is you keep on trying to put more salt in your mouth, and you're not making it better, you're making it much, much worse. You need water, admit it, drink the water, the living water, of course, Jesus.
The living
And
water.
when someone says, James Valliant, you have a God-shaped void in your heart, and you filled it with so many other things, but someday, if you'll admit to yourself, you are running like Jonah from Nineveh.
Right.
You are running away to Joppa because you won't admit that you have a God-shaped void in your heart. How do you think through that, and how do you talk to people that would use that as an argument for what your life has been about when you turned away from Christianity?
Well, in my mind, what I'm thinking is they have a God-shaped hole in their brain, and right, that they can't. The concept of God is their prior assumption that they can't exist. And what gives it plausibility, of course, is people do often have needs that go unfulfilled. They do have psychological issues, and especially if they've been raised by religion. Religion will have trained them from childhood that only God could have solved that. So if you had a childhood of religion, that's what they're doing, is they're trying to get you back to the psychology you were when you were a child raised by a Christian family, right? You remember all those things. See, that's that God-shaped hole in your heart.
Yeah.
No,
It's like they're saying, come on, it's almost like a way of saying, come on, it's true.
Well, no, all I can do is respond with things like, there is no such thing in me. In fact, there's the opposite in me. I'd have certain preliminary questions. Is it an Allah-shaped, an Ahura Mazda-shaped hole in your heart? Or is it the Christian God-shaped hole in your heart? I suspect it'll vary from culture and religion to culture and religion, the exact contours of that hole in the heart.
Yeah.
But all I can do is, from my own experience, tell you that I have no need for any supernatural dimension, any need for a God. God is a positive problem for me actually being happy, is the way I see it. God would interfere. The concept of God would destroy my mind, destroy my psychology, make moral judgment as I've outlined it impossible for me. It would absolutely, see, I've got a whole worldview too, that the notion of God would be a threat to every aspect of. See, so for me, it's quite the opposite. For me to respect your rights, I have to be an atheist. My grounding for why I don't commit murder and why I don't lie to gain values is earthly. And so if you introduce this concept of God, now you've threatened my basis of morality. Now I'm saying, well, why can't I go kill kids like Abraham was told by God? So no. Now you've created all kinds of confusion. epistemological, moral, personal, psychological confusion. More than that, my joys are all earthly. You could say I'm trying to fill a void with love and a happy, and a success, fulfilling career or something. Well, no, wait a minute. Having a fulfilling career and having a wonderful, intimate relationship with my wife are actually the substance of my happiness. They're what make my life happy. Happy. I mean, I would have a holly-shaped hole in my heart without my wife. I would have a purpose, a earthly purpose-shaped hole in my heart if I didn't have a career goal here on earth for a rewarding career. No, it's those kind of things that give us happiness. And it's this happiness that's the only thing I'm considering. There's nothing else but earthly happiness. So, but I know that I could misuse it. I know that, for example, if I became a heroin addict, I could endanger and threaten all of my values. That would be suicide on the installment plan. Now, if I have a psychological problem that I'm not addressing, and you come along and say, well, that's that God-shaped hole in your heart that you're trying to fill with heroin, I'd look for other psychological reasons to that, too. I'd look to their childhood, their insecurities, how they got started on drugs, the habits they formed when they were on drug, all the things that drug counseling and drug recovery psychology has taught us a great deal about in the last century. There are reasons why people become addicts, for example, and they generally don't have to do with the absence of a fictitious being. A Zeus-shaped hole or an Ahura Mazda-shaped hole in anyone's heart either.
I love how you brought that together. And I would just add too, when you look at that idea of a God-shaped void, and you'd say, well, what would it take for you to, if a Christian were to say, what would it take for you to agree with me that there is a God-shaped void in your heart? And you'd have to say, well, okay, well, let's talk about this God then that you're saying is going to fill my heart. What you mentioned, which God is it? Really big questions, but it does bring up this issue of, if he's really going to fulfill us, then there needs to be some sense in which I can look at the propositions of the Bible, and I can say, yes, that actually does, that I feel fulfilled intellectually, I feel fulfilled spiritually, I feel like I can thrive. And if that were the case, like you said, you would be able to look at this character, the Yahweh character, and say, when I'm absolutely enthralled with who he is and what he's been doing as described in the Bible, when I think about what he has done in history, it just wells up inside of me a delight and a joy. And like you were alluding to a few minutes ago, the character of the Yahweh deity is basically like a narcissistic psychopath. And the more that I dwell on it, I don't mean to be
not a nice guy.
It's not a nice guy. The more that I dwell on it, and the whole idea of, he has to, we mentioned circumcision, but the idea that he has to have blood to forgive. Why would he need blood? Why couldn't he just say, I just forgive you? And the whole idea of, oh, I'll kill Satan, or I'm sorry, I'll kill Jesus, but I won't kill Satan. Like, the more that we learn about his character, the more it seems like he's weird. He's really just weird. But it doesn't make any logical sense. But also, I think even experientially, like, to me, I was a Christian till the age of 43. I came to know the Lord as my Savior around 5, somewhere between 5 and 8.
Wow.
Placed my faith in Christ as my personal
More than 35 years you were a Christian.
Yeah, he was my Lord and Savior.
Early childhood through your early 40s.
Yeah, around age 11, I'd rededicated my life. I was like, I want to make sure that I really mean this, and I did. And the evidence was there. The biggest desire of my heart was to bring people into the kingdom of God. There was nothing that weighed more heavily in my heart than the lost.
Well, of course.
Didn't have
if
the gospel.
You believed that, you'd be in a desperate quest to save as many human souls as possible. You'd want first to secure your own soul, but then when you had some confidence in that regard, you'd want to convert every person you could possibly convert.
Yeah.
My God, you don't want their immortal souls to be condemned. Yeah. So you're out there trying to spread the word just as far as possible. Yeah. You'd have a sort of aggressive missionary zeal, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I did. Yeah, and I went to missionary school to do that. But, when you think about, all right, the 30 plus years, 43 total, exposed heavily to the word of God and the gospel, you think, okay, well, if God really wanted to impress upon me that he was real, that he was praiseworthy as a character, that I could thrive by thinking about what he's been doing and what he's like, that would make me well up with joy. He had 43 years to do it, in which I was in a very good, very good Christian family that loved Jesus, solid Bible churches, Christian, two Christian colleges, Bob Jones University and Lancaster Bible College, and then a mission school with New Tribes Mission, now called Ethnos 360. All these years, all this training, and I personally was on fire for it. I was reading theology books voluntarily, the systematic theologies, big volumes, 7 volumes, 11 volumes. I would read through them for fun as a 13-year-old. I loved Jesus. I loved the Bible. He had so much of a chance to say, I am filling the void in your heart. And eventually it just all fell apart. And to me, if God can't in 43 years say, I can make you thrive on me alone. You don't need the world. You don't need anything. You need me and the gospel. I can bring you to such a fervor and joy. Instead, it just slowly fell apart. And not because of somebody that hurt me, or I just didn't want to obey God. It was purely because I slowly learned where this thing came from. And I just think more and more, if there's really a void in our hearts, he would know how to not just fill it, but make it extremely attractive. He'd make us want, it would feel like it's kind of like when you meet the person, like you mentioned to your wife. I'm sure that when you finally realize, like, this is the woman I'm going to spend my life with, I love being with her. You just, wow, I'm alive. This is great. I want to spend my time with her. And it just gives you so much peace and pleasure and joy. And the more that I dwell on the Bible, on the gospel, on the Yahweh character, on the Jesus character, I'm sorry, but Yahweh and Jesus are jerks. And,
Yeah, right.
and the Bible story.
Think about the fulfillment as a parent that you get,
Yeah.
right? Think of the unparalleled fulfillment as a parent that gives you. That's where joy comes from. That's where our sense of accomplishment comes from. That's where our sense of, happiness and fulfillment comes from. To think that there's this fictitious being out there that can substitute for our relationships, for having a rewarding career, doing something positive with your life, having children, that those aren't going to be the joys in your life. I don't know. Joy is the result of achieving a value. Happiness is the psychological state of getting what you were working for, getting what you were seeking. And and the things in the earthly things to seek, sure, are comfort, but knowing that I have a purpose here on earth and I'm doing a productive end here on earth, knowing that seeing my values reflected and shared back with me and sharing that with another human being in an intimate way. That's where I'm going to, seeing children grow that I help develop. That's where our joys are going to come from in life. To think that there's this mystical, elf-shaped, there's my invisible elf again, some invisible elf-shaped gap in my soul is just bizarre. No, those are people who already have holes in their soul. I don't know what shape they are, but they've got holes in their soul and they need them filled.
Yeah. And maybe to add to that phrase, misery loves company.
Misery loves company.
They think they have a hole in their heart and they want you to think so too.
Right. See,
Yeah.
it's confession more than anything.
Yeah. We're short on time here at this point, but I just want to give a plug for the next time we chat. We had a whole bunch of juicy topics to add at the end, and it's just too late to get to them, but I'm going to give a plug anyway, so that people, when they see your name pop up again on my channel, they think, I need to listen to this. Unless for some reason something comes on the radar and we decide to interject a intermediary topic, like Neoplatonism or something. But we were going to talk about for a while about first something like misogyny and patriarchy and how that's how Christianity hurts women, how it mistreats them. That's a hot topic in some ways, but it's I think we would take it a lot further than some of the kind of liberal Christians would. We're not looking to say that we need to have a more liberal Christianity. We're saying this the whole cult hurts women. But we also were going to talk about a much more positive, fun topic, embracing eroticism and the subject of polyamory. So some pretty juicy topics there. We need to schedule a time and talk about those because I want to hear what you think.
Absolutely must. Well, believe it or not, the last subject there actually came up in my book about Ayn Rand.
Really?
It's relevant to her in her own biography, in fact.
Hmm.
So, yes,
We have some things to talk about.
As I say, she embraced sex and a philosophy of living on Earth in a very moral way, I believe, though, right?
Hmm.
She had only long-term serious relationships. She believed in total honesty, for example. But yeah, what a juicy topic to talk about. Do we love life? Do we like sex? Is it a good thing? Or is it a sin? Is it a bad thing? Something to hide and be ashamed of and induce guilt in our children about for the rest of their lives?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Yes. Sex, good. Yeah. No.
And maybe
so much to discuss on that.
And you bring a good side topic there is maybe in terms of bringing it back as often due to the deconversion side of it, healing, healing from shame, healing from whether it's virginity culture or purity culture, modesty culture.
I just heard from a young man who spent the ages of 22 to 24, he said, absolutely celibate, wouldn't even touch himself. Here is a young man in his early 20s. I remember back when I was in my 20s. I was a healthy young biological Homo sapien male.
Keep it PG.
Yeah, so it seems to me when we're doing that to young people, it's horrific. What the hell are we doing to young people with sexual guilt? It's inhuman. It's just monstrous in my view.
Yeah, and to tell people, yeah, and to tell people that your value and your worth is wrapped up in your virginity. It's
what you sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, let's plan it. Let's do it. Let's dive into some of those.
No, we'll definitely do part 2 and maybe part 3 or more. So
yeah, well, I just appreciate again your time. I know we're both very busy people, but I appreciate you squeezing this in, and I do want to do it again. But I appreciate, just to say where I started from, I appreciate your zest for these topics, your zest for life. You aren't just looking to chloroform and catalog and get things all coldly dissected. You want to live life and kind of what's that phrase? Seize the day. And what is that in Latin? What is that?
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. Oh, I should know that. You just want to carpe the diem. And
carpe the diem. That's it.
And I appreciate that. So I just wanted to say thank you. And did you have any final thoughts for us as we wrap up?
No. You see, this is what happens. I won't say that because God knows I've come a long way, baby. I got a long way more to go. But you're right. If I do now convey an attitude that loves life and enjoys life, it's because I embrace life in a self-conscious way, and I could never have done that with religion.
That's awesome. Praise the Lord. Just kidding. Great to talk to you, James. And let's do it again soon.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks again.